Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews on just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at WulverBlade for the Nintendo Switch. Primarily because a couple fans referenced it, and because it's on a particularly deep sale right now. But regardless of the sale price, if you are a history buff, if you like the Vikings, the Norse, Scandinavian culture, and even the Celts, and you're not particularly a fan of the Roman Empire circa year 1000, then you might really dig this game. Because that is the setting and scenario for WulverBlade. Pretty much the Roman Empire has put together the 9th Legion, which was a much less than ragtag band of military veterans rounded up from every other culture they had conquered, who were sent out to go and dominate the British Isles in the name of Rome. And as legend would have it, not a single one of them ever returned from that fight. And this should show you just how utterly savage the early Britons were, and I mean that in the absolute best way possible. But instead of playing through the game as what you might expect to be a large-scale battle strat sim, it's actually a pretty straightforward old-school arcade-style classic brawler. And so starting out, picking one of 3 playable characters, either the primary character, which is pretty well balanced, the gigantic brawler with very low defense, or the more acrobatic female character who's really gifted with aerial juggling. If you're a brawler, you know what that means. You'll pretty much be engaging in your own solo campaign across the British Isles as you bare-knuckle brawl your way from one end to the other to force the Romans out of your country. Though as much of a fan of button mashing as everybody is, don't lie, there actually is a fairly intricate combat system for any way that you want to pummel your enemies to death. And so depending on your own particular attack style, or maybe the situations you find you're in with the hordes of enemies as they engage you from the right and left side of the screen, you'll be able to grapple, throw, beat, do aerial attacks, and even stab people in the face when they're on the ground. So let's not kid ourselves, this is a very violent game. And pretty much no matter what you do or how you engage with combat, you'll be working toward unlockable achievements such as hitting 100 enemies with severed body parts. and I have to be honest, that actually made me start doing it because I wanted to get that achievement. But the total campaign of the game is broken up over about 8 major levels, and these can be played in either arcade style or campaign style. Arcade style gameplay is just like you get at a quarter cabinet. You get 3 lives and 3 continues, and that's pretty much it until you get a game over. There are no checkpoints, there is no going back. Campaign mode, though, allows you to play in a little bit more of a modern feel. There are checkpoints. You can quit and come back and finish your progress right where you left off. And there's also additional difficulty levels if you want to play on easy mode if you're not quite a huge fan of brawler style games, or if you want to really just push yourself to the limit. But in addition to all this, there's a lot about the game that I did not expect. One was the huge, rich, historical campaign backstory of real events that really happened. Or at least they happened as far as we know from what little documents exist. And the other was the expanding lore and complements of collectible weapons. Because these, in addition to actual video footage of the area and a little bit of history, well, they don't really seem to belong in a brawler. I mean, if you are a fan of history, those are huge draws. But if you really just want to ground and pound your way to the end of the game, you might not care or even just miss a lot of these possible collectible things. But moving on to the visuals and the audio, they are both, really phenomenal. The visuals have a really nice, really high quality hand-drawn aesthetic, and the audio shifts from impactful to kind of moody, and just flows with the ever-changing dynamics as the lore and scenario of the game unfolds. And so presentation-wise, the game did it really well. But despite that, it doesn't mean that WulverBlade is exactly without its flaws. And first and foremost of which is kind of like I mentioned earlier with the collectibles, there's a lot of things about the game that I particularly love that just don't seem to belong in a brawler-style game. Normally when you think classic, iconic 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up, you think low pixel count, you think pretty much one-button combat with jumps thrown in, and you would probably never anticipate there being a story that's more than just a very topical scenario. And so while having really high quality graphics and audio is a huge plus, and having a really deep scenario that unfolds as you play definitely builds intrinsic player investment. As cool as they are, the collectibles and the extra information, they just seem a little out of place. And I'm not saying they're bad, not in any way whatsoever. They just are so different that you'll definitely notice them, and depending on what type of player you are, that may be a good or a bad thing. But regardless of collectibles and historical context, one thing that every single player is going to notice, and maybe for better or worse, is the combat system of the game. Most everything in WulverBlade is done with the A button. And that is from picking up items off the ground, to reading signs that are seemingly background items, to actually punching your enemies to death. And this does mean that in the middle of combat, your character can achieve certain actions that you probably don't want them doing. And this may include stopping to pick something up while you're getting pummeled to death, grabbing an item that is much weaker than yours to fight with, slowing down combat to pick up a throwable item when your enemy is attacking you. And the list goes on and on. But as frustrating as it can be, in all honesty, those are things you can learn to avoid. And this is in stark contrast to the ability to dodge attacks. There is a dodge roll function in the game, but it's kind of hard to pull off. And so while the jump function wasn't meant to be the dodge function, it does essentially become your best avenue for attack avoidance. And so in that sense, the control scheme of the game really could have been tooled and polished a little bit more, especially when compared to the visual presentation of the game. But moving along from that little issue, there is one other thing that might be a personal experience with the game, and I'm not 100% certain, so I figured I'd include it in the review, but don't let it scare you off, because I haven't actually heard this from anyone else. And that is that I had a point where the campaign mode of the game around level 4 just refused to progress. After the load screen, it would just go black, and no matter how long I would wait, it would just be that way. So I restarted the game about 5 or 6 times trying to load to actually play past level 4, and I couldn't. So I had to actually uninstall the game, wipe everything, start over and play through again. And so maybe it was a bug in my download, I'm not sure, but it did happen, so I did want to mention it. And so taking a step back and looking at WulverBlade as a complete experience, not just a package, not just a game, for what it is, it actually was really fun, especially considering the sale price of about $2. It's a really big game, and unlike some other beat-em-up titles out there with different characters to pick from, the 3 main characters in WulverBlade actually do play really significantly differently. And though the collectibles and items to find in WulverBlade seem to be really out of character for a beat-em-up style game, they add so much to it, especially if you go back to the map and you watch the historical documentation and you read the history of certain weapons that were used in the old British Empire around that time, especially the ones used to fend off the Romans. And so like I said earlier in the game, even if you're not particularly a huge fan of brawlers and beat-em-up style games, because WulverBlade does have a campaign mode with continues, and because it does have an easier difficulty mode to allow you to actually play through the game and experience more of the story, if you're a history buff, if you're a fan of Scandinavian and Celtic cultures, if you're a fan of historically based story games, then WulverBlade might actually be one that you'd be interested in. And interestingly enough, if you are a fan of classic arcade-style brawlers because of the arcade mode and the leaderboards, definitely one that's going to challenge you. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of WulverBlade now on the Nintendo Switch, so if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a comment or a like to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indie games coming out literally every single day, so whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolutely unforgettable gem, chances are if it's on the Switch, you're going to find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been The Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.